En Librísimo seguimos descubriendo lo más nuevo del 2026 en ciencia ficción, fantasía y terror y esos géneros que se entrecruzan y sorprenden. Si te gusta nuestro trabajo, apóyanos, suscríbete al canal, deja un comentario y pulsa el me gusta. Además de en YouTube, también estamos en formato podcast en iVoox. En este episodio nos visita GennaRose Nethercott para hablar de su antología Bestias, Espacios y Fábulas de lo Extraño, publicada en nuestro país por Horror Vacui y traducida por Sarai Herrera y Sergio Chesán. GennaRose es autora de la novela THISTLEFOOT y del libro de relatos del que vamos a hablar hoy. Además es escritora y folclorista, ha participado en la creación del podcast Lore y recorre Estados Unidos y otros países presentando relatos extraños, a veces acompañada de marionetas. Su primer libro, un poema narrativo titulado The LUMBERKACK'S DOVE, fue seleccionado por Louise Glück como ganador del National Poetry Series. Vive en los bosques de Vermont junto a un antiguo cementerio, por supuesto. Y ahora sí, entramos en materia con la entrevista. And here we are with GennaRose. I wanted to thank you so much for being here and welcome to Librisimo, your space for new releases in Spanish. And here you are with a beautiful anthology, which is, I'm going to say it in Spanish. In Spanish it's a little different than in English, but it's almost the same. Bestias, Espacios y Fábulas de lo Extraño. Yeah, that's right. Which
so
is
pretty.
50 beasts to break your heart, another story. So, GennaRose, we're going to start from the beginning, which is the first thing the readers find when they meet your book, which is not just the cover, but the title. And I know, even though there's a little difference in the Spanish title, but I think it grasps the idea that you wanted to encapsulate in the English title. Why did you decide to call this book 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart and Other Stories?
Yeah, so I wrote these stories over the course of about a decade. The first of them I wrote when I was 21 years old. It was actually not the first in the book, but the earliest that I wrote.
Okay.
I wrote when I was about 21. I think that was Foxjaw. And that was one of the first short stories I ever wrote. The last one in the book I wrote when I was 31. So it actually kind of like encapsulates my 20s in this interesting way. And they were written as these disparate pieces, but as I saw the book start to come together, as I kind of realized that I had an anthology on my hands, it was very clear that there was this through thread through all of the stories. Everything I write is sort of monstrous and speculative and horror tinged and magical realism tinged. So there's always like weird, freaky little creatures in there. As a 20-something primarily writing this book, a lot of what I was concerned with at that stage in my life were these feelings of sort of longing and yearning and heartbreak and how to connect to other people, be it romantically or platonically or familially. And just, all those questions that we kind of grapple with at that stage in life about like, how do you exist in relationship to others? How do you love without loving too much? How do you receive love and accept it? How do you give love to yourself? And yeah, so it's sort of a reflection both of the literal monsters in the book, of course, but also sort of the monstrosity of human emotion and connection.
Yes. I have to say that I didn't know what to expect when I was reading the book. And I was very surprised because it's not... So when you think, okay, there's going to be some kind of... beasts is in the title, so this creature's there somewhere. But it's not what I am used to in sense of you were writing as if they are the most normal things in the world, like no questions. It was like your prose was so bold and direct and unapologetic, and it's like, okay, this is not what I'm used to when I'm talking about monsters. It's as if they're not that different from us or from the rest of society, because I know that I've read some of your interviews and you talk about monsters and what that they represent, or at least for you. And I think I think everybody who's fan of the channel, it's a fan of also monsters and what they represent. And I wanted to know, why are you drawn not just towards monsters, but to this kind of horror mixed with folk? Obviously it's speculative fiction, but it's in the folk, it's in almost a fairy tale, weird kind of text narratives. Why you feel like that's your canvas? Why you're drawn into that?
I think it's kind of hard to say what originally pulled me in, but on like the most base level, that's just, to me, that is the closest thing to my version of realism. When I read, and I've talked about this in interviews in the past, but when I engage with literature that is deemed realism, it feels deeply untrue to me in certain ways quite often, because my experience of existing in the world is much more hyperbolic. It's much more metaphor based. I see things through these kind of narrative, almost like lighting gels in a way, where that's kind of the sheen that's placed over everything. And I grew up with a lot of fairy tales and folk tales. I grew up here where I am now in rural Vermont, which is a very sort of mythic, gothic, strange place. Like this town that I live in, I live right next door to a cemetery that's filled with like Puritan graves from the 1700s. And down the road in the woods, there's like a secret castle tower that like were built by mental patients in an institution in the 1800s. And like that's just sort of the normal existence of the place that raised me. And so I think that kind of naturally became my filter. And then when I was in my collegiate studies, I ended up studying, Vivian sighting.
Hello, Vivian.
This is Captain Vivian Cutpurse, the fiercest pirate on the seven seas. She will make appearances. But I studied folklore in college, and that's really when I started more ethnologically dissecting what does it mean for a monster, or I guess like what are monsters saying, not about monsters, but about people.
Yeah.
And you talk about how the logic of it, the kind of presence of the monsters are just a given. And that's a very intentional, I think, like genre tool that I like to use. I really see the like fantasy and magical realism I see as very different modes, and she's really going for it back here. But I see myself as a magical realist where any magic, any supernatural elements, any creature, like non-human paranormal creatures in a story, rather than being a literal physical part of the world and functioning the way that like science would function, like a magic system, to me, it's all a metaphor for emotion. So it is, it is a given. It is just the way we move through the world is, your heart is broken and sudden, or say you're like trailing after someone in love in this state of limerence, and suddenly there is this creature mewling next to you that is representing that longing. Like that's how it kind of feels to be a person, at least in my experience. And so, so in that sense, it just kind of makes it's the only natural way to write about it. And I think part of that too came from receiving kind of a sense of permission from other writers. My favorite writer of all time is Kelly Link, who is just the master of this mode. And I the first time I read her when I was about 20 years old, I remember thinking like, oh, you're allowed to write the way that I think. You can just say it. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to orient a reader and say, I know this is different than our world, but you can just exist in your reality. And that was really exciting to me and very emboldening for me as well.
We love Kelly Link. We hope to have her maybe, hopefully one day here, because she's been mentioned few times in the the course of this podcast. And as I always say when I speak about my favorite, one of my favorite authors, I'm not going to say the name. Everybody knows who it is. But
I don't know. Who is it?
Okay, I have to say China Miéville. So when I read China Miéville, or when I read it for the first time, I felt I am at home. That's how I explain it. I can't, it's like, I've never read this before, but I feel at home. I feel everything is so familiar, even if he's from another country, another culture. So I guess that's kind of like the same kind of, and also I wanted to tackle a little bit about emotions. You were talking about emotions, and I have another friend in Spain who's a horror author, and she tells me many times that people who write horror are very, very sensitive, and they're very sensitive to feelings and emotions, and that's what if they're good, that's what transpires in their stories. And when I was reading your stories, that's what I felt. I felt like, okay, there's creatures here, but there's so many emotions, and some of them are unsettling, but some of them are you understand them. And I wanted to know, you said that you wrote the stories. There are 14, by the way, in this anthology. You wrote it in the course of 10 years approximately, right? And I wanted to talk about a little bit about some of them. Maybe we can't talk about all of them because there's so many, but I think that the first one that I read, I think it's the first one in the English and in the Spanish version, Sundown at the Eternal Staircase, has a very interesting premise. Maybe you can explain a little bit. What is it about?
Yeah, so Sundown at the Eternal Staircase is about two sort of failure to launch 20-something young women who are working at this strange roadside attraction in their hometown. And the nature of this roadside attraction is that it is a staircase that continues indefinitely, forever, into the abyss.
Okay.
And as the story continues through, one of these two women becomes increasingly sort of entranced by going deeper and deeper and deeper into this staircase. And this is probably my favorite story in the collection, which is why I put it right at the front. But so I say that it was written over the course of 10 years, which is true, but the bulk of the stories were written in about a 4-month chunk.
Wow.
So my first book, it's called The Lumberjack's Dove. It's a book-length poem in the form of a folktale. When I was 26, it was picked up for this big poetry prize, and I was like, oh my God, this is it, my big break, everything I've been trying for.
Yeah.
So I got to do this up right. And for me, doing this up right meant converting the trunk of my car into a little camper, booking over 100 readings, collaborating with a friend to create a puppet show animating the poem, and then driving around the country for 8 months straight, performing this poem puppet show out of the trunk of my car. And in the midst of this totally normal and sane choice that I made, I had an agent who became interested in my work and was like, I'd love to publish your short fiction collection. And I was like, I don't have a short fiction collection, but I can pretend I do. And so, long story short, I would drive all day. I'd perform this shadow scrolling puppet show thing. I was traveling solo too.
Okay.
Perform this show at a bookstore, sign books, find somewhere to pull over on the side of the road, crawl into the trunk of my car, work on a story, and then go to sleep.
Wow.
And then I would do it again the next day. And so the way that Sundown at the Eternal Staircase came about is I was on this trip. I was driving in, I think I was in New Mexico at that point. Didn't know a single person in New Mexico. I had just done a reading in Santa Fe, and it was night and it was winter, and I was driving to try and find somewhere to pull over. And as I'm driving down the road, I see there's a homeless woman on the side of the Meridian, and she's all wrapped up in a scarf, so I can't see her face or anything. I can just see the shape of her, and she's flying a sign. And immediately, I don't know why I thought this or knew this or felt this, but I was like, that is my friend. And it I slammed on the brake and I yelled her name out the window, and it was one of my closest, oldest friends from growing
Wow.
up. And
Wow.
I didn't even know she was in New Mexico. It was crazy. And so she is someone who had struggled with addiction for a long time. The place that I'm from, we have one of the highest opiate overdose rates in the country, in America, and we have a big problem with that in the United States right now. And yeah, so she was stuck in New Mexico, like hooked on heroin, living in a hotel or in like a shitty motel with like other drug users, and her boyfriend was in jail, and she was just like stuck out there. And I just like happened to see her there out on the side of the road. It was this bizarre like road magic, and we just looked at each other and we're like, what on earth? Like this is so wild. And the day, I we chatted a little bit, then she kind of went off. She wasn't like fully there, so she, she had other
Yeah.
priorities. And I tried to get a hold of her to see her the next day. She never responded. I just had this feeling like I don't think I'm going to see her
No.
again. I did actually see her again. I ended up writing this story though, like the day after I saw her. This
Okay.
story about these young women, and it's really is an addiction parable. This like descending deeper and deeper and deeper
Yes.
into this stairwell, until eventually this young woman disappears. And I remember thinking while writing it, like I'm being so pessimistic, like the end, like, I mean, spoiler, but like the story does not end with the girls escaping the staircase and
Yeah.
living happily ever after. And I was like, man, maybe I'm not being generous enough to her. Um, and then she ended up, because that encounter was so wild, it like kind of snapped her out of her mode for a minute, and she ended up coming home and seeing her mom again. And we're able to I did see her again, and then she did end up overdosing a few months later. But it was just this, yeah. And so it was like the story, like that is how the story ends,
Uh-huh.
and that,
Yeah.
so yeah, I guess that's sort of the origin and the seed of the Eternal Staircase. And I think it's kind of indicative of the way that I shape so many of the stories in this
Yes.
collection is I knew for a long time I wanted to set a story in a staircase that went down forever. I had seen these photos on Tumblr like years and years ago, probably as a teenager, of these Indian stepwells. Actually, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but because yeah,
No.
in there's these like Indian, like in India, these wells that just go down and down and down and
Okay.
down, and they're all stairs. It's like
Okay.
thousands of stairs. And I always wanted to set a story there. I didn't know who was going to be in that story. I didn't know what the metaphor of that story would be, what the heart of or the emotion of the story would be. And it wasn't until I saw my friend that suddenly I realized,
Yeah.
oh, that is who is in the stairwell, and that is what these stairs mean. So that tends to be the order of things, is I'll have a premise, I'll have like a strange surrealist setting or surrealist concept. Like there's another story in the book of like a woman who drowns, who repeatedly drowns every time
Yes,
she
yes,
encounters
yes.
liquid.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, that's a weird idea. I want to write something where that happens. I don't know what it means.
Yes.
And then as I actually dive into the story, uh, my unconscious knows what that means, even if I don't consciously know what it means, and it will emerge in the process of the writing.
Actually, I'm very fond of June, and I hope I said it way. Hairbell?
Hairbell.
Hairbell.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the two girls in the first story, Sundown at the Eternal Staircase. And I didn't know about the Indian well, the stairs thingy that you mentioned, but I'm gonna look it up. I was thinking about this staircase that goes down in Sintra in Portugal, down. Instead of going up, it goes down, but it
Mhm.
doesn't go down forever. It's just very strange to see something going not up.
Totally.
Normally, staircases to go
I
up,
think
right?
these are in India. I did see it on Tumblr in like
Yeah.
2007, so
But
who can
but
say? But
apparently, it's it happens in many like few
Mhm.
cultures, so it means something, and we could like dive into every story. I wanted to talk about one that I thought it was delicious. All of them are delicious, but this one, it touched me, the Thread Boy, because I
Hmm.
thought it was yes, there's a certain melancholic tone, nostalgia in the stories, and this one is also. But I also thought maybe it's because I've just came from seeing My Boys or something. But I thought this Thread Boy was. If I thought about Pinocchio, I thought about other stories that I've read, and how young men try to make their lives in their world, and I thought it was very touching, even though maybe it's not as flamboyant as the first one or some of the other ones, but I thought it was so sensitive and so cute. I'm sorry to say cute, but I thought it was cute.
No, I mean, I think Threadboy is very much like the most pure like fairy tale
Yes.
of the
Yeah,
collection.
yeah, yeah.
It's very much a fairy tale
Yes.
through and through, and it has kind of the trappings of it and sort of the whimsy of fairy tale in a way that it's less horror tinged, I think, than
Yes.
some of the other stories. But yeah, it's that one I actually wrote all in one sitting. I was at a writing residency called Vermont Studio Center up a few hours north of me, and they like give you fresh baked bread every day in a little
Wow.
armchair next to a river. And I just woke up one morning with this idea, and I sat down and I wrote this entire story. And it kind of came out exactly the way you see it on the
Yes.
page, which is always very exciting when that happens because that is not how writing
Yep.
usually works, as I'm sure you well know. But yeah, it's on the simplest level, the Thread Boy is about a boy made of thread, and any time he grows attached to anyone or anything, a piece of his thread snags on that, and then as he moves through the world, there's always this string leading back to these loves. And again, I think like sometimes people will read this collection, people who are less used to supernatural stories in this mode and are like, I don't understand what's going. And I'm like, that's just how it feels to me to exist in the world. That's
Yes.
how it feels to me
Yes.
to love
Yeah.
people and to go places and to have these experiences and to allow oneself to form attachments. Is there's the joy of attachment, and then there's also this pang of feeling like you're tied to something. And again, I wrote these throughout my 20s, which was a time for me of immense mobility. I really wasn't in the same place for more than a few months at a time for pretty much that entire decade, sometimes only a few days at a time. And so much of my existence was feeling like every time you walk towards something, it means you're walking away from
Yeah.
something else. And that was my constant mode at that age. And to me, that felt like such a pure representation of that sensation of, and the kind of this feeling that there's these tight ropes leading to everything.
And the
And you can
connections,
pluck
right?
at them and
The
feel
web,
it reverberate.
the web of connections, connecting with others, especially when you leave your home and get into the world. I thought it was beautiful the way it was literal. I mean, it's really you're physically connected, but I thought it worked very well, and it made me smile. And even though many of those stories make me smile for other reasons, maybe because I thought, "Ooh, this is uncanny," or or "Wow, this is like so surprising." Like we have to talk about the story that gives the title to the collection, to the anthology, which is 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart. And it's a beautiful collection of these amazing creatures that I couldn't stop reading them. And then with the illustrations, I think it's Bobby DiTrani who does that. Magnificent. And
Oh, he's amazing. Yeah.
I'm like, how did she come up with those? I mean, I've read so many, mythology and folklore from my country and other countries, but to make your own bestiary of creatures, which is more or less what he did, I thought it was amazing. And the things that there were all kinds of creatures, and not necessarily villain, like bad per se. They're just strange
Totally. Yeah.
And
I had become very obsessed with the medieval Latin bestiaries.
mm,
And, for those of you, like, if anyone out there hasn't seen these, look them up. They're incredible. And
yes.
basically, medieval monks were creating these encyclopedic compendiums of all the known animals, mostly real animals, but also mythic animals. But also, even with the real animals,
Mm,
like, these were cloistered monks. These guys had not seen most of these
yes.
animals. And so it's like, here's my best guess what a hippopotamus looks like, which
Yes.
is, spoiler, not what a hippopotamus looks like.
Mm,
And so they just had these incredible interpretations of what these creatures in the world
mm.
looked like and how they operated. Like they thought that goats were so sexy that their blood could melt diamonds. They
What?
just looked at that and they were like, that
Okay.
thing's pretty damn hot. Bet it could melt a diamond.
Okay.
They thought that hedgehogs had spikes on their backs so that
Uh,
they could roll in a pile of grapes,
mm,
get a little grape stuck to each spike, and then go home and feed all the grapes to their children. Like it was just incredible. And they were also very allegorical. They often were like
yes.
Christian allegory baked into the encyclopedic descriptions. And I
Mm,
was really taken with that mode of, something like an encyclopedia, which is so traditionally factual, based in
mm,
like fact and information, being melded with like the emotional and the spiritual.
mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart, the story is 50 creatures of my own invention that kind of mimics that form. And my dear friend Bobby Detrani illustrated every one of them. I have the book right here, so I can show
Yes.
some of them because they're so freaky and cool. This guy's one of my favorite.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's that kind of like the
Yeah.
door, like it's more
Oh,
than a
yeah.
creature, it's like a portal, maybe. Yes.
These guys,
There's
like,
amazing. Yeah.
there's, they'd
Beautiful.
make great tattoos, just
Yes.
saying. I think one or two people out there have a tattoo of one, but I'm always
I
gonna more.
was really surprised because some of them were very familiar in the sense of some of the creatures I myself, you know, wrote into some of my stories. And I'm like, what? How come, like, I don't know this person, but she just come up with the same kind of
That's great.
creature. And I'm like, that's what I was like, oh my God, she read kind of my mind. It was like,
Like which
wow,
ones?
the Sotheby's.
Really?
Yeah, 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 yeah. That
Huh.
was, and it's like this, the second or the third. I'm like, oh my, oh. I was like, the, I don't know. This is strange. This is weird. I'm like, oh my, oh,
Monsters they're a
yeah.
little uncanny. They're in there. I mean, I think that's
We
one of the
shared.
reasons I am so in love with this mode, and I think so many of us are so in love with the monstrous, is that they really are mirrors of ourselves and mirrors of our world and our communities. And so, in folklore, the same kind of creatures do show up all over the
Yes,
world.
yes, yes.
And you'd think that these would be impossible intersections, and yet, you know, all over the world when there's an earthquake they all in like so many different cultures have interpreted an earthquake as being there's a creature under the ground shaking
Yes.
like stomping and throwing a fit, right?
Mm,
Or you know changeling legends have come about when like all over the world if like your child is ill or a child dies, people need to have an explanation for
yes.
that, so there's these all sorts of inventions of monsters that take
Mm-hmm,
children away or that punish children or that hide
mm,
children.
mm-hmm,
um and so I think that is what's really exciting to me in certain ways about working with supernatural creatures
mm-hmm,
is, who cares what a monster says about a monster?
mm-hmm,
What I care about is what a monster says about a person
mm-hmm,
and what mirrors that monstrosity holds up.
mm,
I was very taken with there was a panel that I saw at a writing conference in which it was Sophia Samatar, who is
yes.
genius, genius,
Yeah, yeah.
genius, was the moderator, and she was talking about how, um, talking about the idea of monsters as containing opposites. And actually, Theodora Goss was also on this panel and has
Yes.
written about this same topic. The idea that
Mm-hmm,
in order for a monster, or what makes a monster, is that it contains two incompatible traits or more within one body,
mm-hmm,
and that it's this chafing feeling
mm-hmm,
of things that shouldn't be that close together being close together.
mm,
So
yeah.
you have like a vampire that is both alive and dead. You
Mm,
have a werewolf that is animal and human,
mm,
And really, if you look at any monster in folklore, you'll be able to identify two or more seemingly incompatible physical or emotional traits
Yeah.
pressed incredibly close together. And you start to realize, like, oh, it's not really the thing itself we're afraid of, it's that uncanny combination.
Yeah.
It's the idea of two things being too close in a way that doesn't belong. And so, yes, working with these creatures, the way I wrote it was like every day I would go to this cafe down the road. I was living in Boston at the time. I would go to this cafe down the road. I'd sit down, I'd order a cup of coffee, and my task was to just like write one or two new
Oh.
little creatures.
And,
And this was far before they were illustrated. I always wanted them to be illustrated.
yeah,
And
of
then I was
course.
lucky enough when the book was coming out that I was able to convince them to hire my good friend Bobby
Okay.
to do it because he's just the best. And actually, for those, if anyone's read Thistlefoot, it's unfortunately not translated into Spanish. But if anyone's read my novel
Hopefully.
Thistlefoot, yeah, I would love that. Yeah, shout out to if anyone who is a
Yes.
publisher of novels is watching this.
Yes.
Um, there's a bus in Thistlefoot that some of the characters travel in that's like a black spray painted bus with like a horse skull zip tied to the grill. And like that's my friend Bobby's bus.
Okay.
So
Oh,
it's like
wow.
there's these real world elements kind of leaking in. But anyway, so yeah, I had a lot of fun with that story and kind of like we talked about regarding the title of the book, each of these monsters kind of represents a different uh, like facet of longing or attachment. And you know, I talk about it as like representing or being a metaphor for it's not as like direct a pair. It's not I don't sit down to write and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write something now that represents a like when someone leaves you at the altar or whatever, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's more of a like an abstract emotional translation. And I think for me, that is in part why I write in this mode too, is like these are feelings that I cannot verbalize in any other way. And I cannot filter in any other way and interpret in any other way other than the words that I put down, which are the words of these creatures. So yeah, like if someone were to ask me directly, like, what does this monster mean or represent? I wouldn't be able to say it,
Yeah.
but I would be able to feel it. And those are my favorite kinds of stories. That's why I love Kelly Link's work. That's why I love Sophia Samatar's work, is these are writers who you couldn't maybe verbally translate them into realism, but you can feel them as true.
Yeah. And you also said it. I mean, I think there is, if I'm not mistaken, there is a sentence in the book that says something about monsters being contradictions, something like that. And because I was highlighting things
Oh
that,
yeah, that's
yeah,
in
yeah,
the Plums at the End of the World, the story about
yeah,
the girl who's half goat, half
have
human.
goat, and
And
then
that was directly inspired by that panel that I heard,
ah,
in
yeah,
which
yeah,
Sophia Samatar and it was an incredible panel. It was Sophia Samatar, Theodora Goss, Kelly Link, Carmen Maria Machado.
wow,
Yeah, it was like it was kind of the best
unbelievable,
panel I've ever seen. I feel like
wow.
the half an hour conversation I watched there informed like the next 5 years of my work.
I
So,
think I would love to live in that panel forever. I mean, that's
right?
some of my
And the
favorite
panel was
people.
about monstrosity.
Of
I
course,
was like,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
No, no, I totally, I got it, and also it was more like when you, I'm totally, I think I connected, and people who is gonna read it in Spanish hopefully will do that. It connected also with the physicality because there's a lot of transformations, like body transformation or body displacement. I mean, things that were like the creatures you just show. Well, it's a goat, but it has a door, and what is like how. And then we have other, like for example, in there's another story in where a woman it starts to become a house, and which I thought it was a great. A great metaphor for, I mean, not everything's a metaphor, but in this case, I think you were talking
That
about
one definitely is a metaphor.
metaphor, yes, but
That's one of the more direct metaphors in the book.
it's exactly. And I thought about what it means to sometimes get into a couple and maybe there is or there is not abuse, but maybe psychological abuse and how you disappear into oblivion and things like that. So I
Exactly.
thought it was really very, like you, so when you talk about those creatures, when we read about them, it's not, you not necessarily are afraid of them. It's what happens around them that you see like, wow, this is, wow. It's like how that displaces things around, and how
Sure.
the characters interact, and how these creatures affect the characters around. This is what it was interesting, the dynamics that creates. It's not about, for those that are watching or listening, it's not about just a creature appearing just to say boo. It's much more
Yeah,
than
and I
that.
would say none of the monsters in this book are the villain of the
Exactly.
story.
Yes.
The monsters are, if anything, the way I sort of think about shaping a story is I'm like sitting in my own emotions. There's something I'm trying to process, like with Homebody, for example.
Yes.
That's the story you mentioned in which a
Yes.
woman turns into a house. I was coming out of a relationship where I didn't realize how intensely I had shrunk myself down and hollowed myself out to accommodate this other person, or what I thought this other person wanted from me, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like the human feeling I was experiencing. And the way that I write is I take what I'm feeling, I'm like, I need to process this somehow, and then I just turn that volume knob up higher and higher and higher until it becomes literal and physical. And so for me, this hollowing out of self in order to accommodate this other person, you turn the volume knob on that up high enough, and suddenly you are literally becoming a house for someone to live in, right? And so in that sense, like all of the stories in this book and all of this, like everything I write essentially functions with that same rule set of just like take what it actually is to be a person, turn that volume knob up until it becomes literal and physical, it's like a bridging of a gap where the external world and the internal world are suddenly the same, they follow the same literal logic. And in that sense, yeah, like I said, none of the monsters in this book are the villains. The monsters are the self. The monsters are different elements of one's own lived experience. So the monsters really should like, to me anyways, the monsters feel like mirrors. The monsters feel like manifestations of like if my own memories and my own sort of mental entanglements and the questions that I live with were to wake up and blink and shake out some feathers, that's what they would look like.
And it's so interesting, the emotions that we can see in all the stories. There's you can see loneliness, betrayal, desire. I was just getting notes: grief, fear, so many different things. And I think the way you do it, it's very clever. That's what I thought. It was very clever and very on point. So I wanted to know if there was one or a couple that were particularly more difficult to write than the others. Because you just mentioned the one that the thread boy, you wrote it just in one go.
In a sitting, yeah.
So that was kind of, because I was gonna ask you what was the more.
And actually, oddly, I wrote the plums at the end of the world in a single sitting as well.
Okay.
Which is kind of, I don't know how I did that because that's like a 16-page short story. That is not, I don't work that way. But I'm a very slow writer. Like I was trained as a poet, so I'm an incredibly slow.
So you rewrite
like
a lot.
every little word is incredibly. Yeah, so I'm finishing up a novel right now, and like Jesus fucking Christ, this is my second novel. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but the truth is I don't know if I don't think one was like particularly hard. I think the thing that I love about this book is that like for me, short stories are my most natural mode of storytelling and of communication, and they feel very second nature to me, very much like breathing, which isn't to say that it's not a labor, it's always a labor.
No. Yeah,
and
of course.
it is always a, Thread Boy and Plums at the End of the World, that those just like plopped out of my brain. That's like very much the exception to the rule. But yeah, I think when it comes to like the writing that I really fight with, is when I'm writing a novel. And to me, that is so unnatural. And it's so not the way that I think. I think with a short story, what I find so comfortable in the mode is that it doesn't need to have this like complete narrative arc. A
Mm,
short story is just like a flash of emotion.
mhm,
It is you're seeing this little sliver. I think of it kind of as like if you're on a train and you're moving through the countryside and you're looking out the window
mm,
and you're seeing these like tiny worlds flash by
mhm,
your window and you don't see the context of that world. You don't see what happens before or what happens
mm,
after. You're just for a moment thrown into this little universe. You glean something from it, you feel something from it, and then it's gone.
mm,
And you're left with more questions than answers. And to me, that's what a good piece of writing should do.
mm,
If a piece of writing hands you every answer that you need, then that's an ending. That's a stopping point that leaves no room for
mhm,
expansion, that leaves no room for imagination and for like you have nothing to take into the world with you after
mhm.
that. And to me, short stories are the perfect shape to be able to delve into a feeling or like an idea, really.
Mhm,
You have enough
mhm,
space to like explore something
mhm,
interesting, but you have not enough space to accidentally kill all the questions.
mhm.
And yeah, so it kind of makes sense to me that way. But then when I try to write a novel, I think novels are there's more, there's too many kind of answers that are demanded in novels in my
Mhm.
experience.
Mm.
And maybe it's just because I'm not as deft a novel writer, you know? I think a good novel writer will leave you with those questions, but
Yeah.
there is this element of a reader has invested so much time in this story, you kind of owe them certain
Yes.
answers by the end.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't like having to give them.
Mm.
So that's often hard for me.
I aim into everything you said because I am so much in love with short stories. I've always been. It's my favorite format, and I always
Mhm.
try to focus on authors that offer them because it's my favorite
You're the
type
best.
of
You're the
narrative. I don't know
best.
why, and I feel your pain because when I write novels, it's for me. It's people, funny enough, most of the people that I know that are authors, they are the opposite. They say, oh,
Mhm.
I prefer to write novels. I can write my whole world building. And I'm like, that's not necessary all the time. We
Mhm.
don't need to know exactly what they eat or how they sleep or but people in general, not me, but people in general love to know those details.
Mhm.
And I totally understand what you mean by tackling into an emotion and just get all the juice out of it and don't give all the answers. I always said I'm a big fan of open endings. I don't know why
Mhm.
people dislike them, but I love them
I
because
don't either. I love them.
I think it's just I actually this is a very personal opinion. I think that it's very respectful towards the reader because you give them the choices. You give them you open doors and you just
Mhm.
like choose the one that you prefer or choose
Mhm.
multiple ones. You can just go and yeah. So
Yeah.
so I don't
And I
like
think
when they're so close. I personally
Mhm.
don't. But I understand that people get frustrated because they're like, "Oh, I want a story with the beginning and an end." And maybe it's because the way we are taught to write, you have to start in the beginning, and then we could talk
Yeah,
forever
there's
about
that
those
rudimentary
things.
beginning, middle, end,
Yes,
closed
some of us
circuit.
don't do that, but
I think that I think part of it that bothers me too is like a piece of writing is always a collaboration with the reader.
Mhm,
There is never a piece of writing that is just you put everything on the page and the reader brings nothing to it.
mhm, yes,
And so to pretend otherwise, I think is going to do a disservice to the work.
mhm,
And so short stories do, at least for me in the way that my process works, it really allows me to lean into that idea of the more questions remain, the more empty space there is, the more I'm deliberately allowing that collaboration with the
exactly.
reader and making space for that collaboration with the reader. I was at a thrift store the other day and there was this pile of old pulp sci-fi paperback novels and one of them had this short story that I had been taught in high school called The Lady and the Tiger. Have you
Okay.
ever read that
No,
story?
no. But
So it's this kind of like classic little short story. It's only about 6 pages. And the whole premise of it is I think it's in like a gladiator ring or something like that. Basically, this king or something. I haven't read it since high school, so I'm really pulling out.
yes.
This is a big paraphrase, but basically, there's this young woman. She has this lover. Her father finds out. He does not approve, so he throws the lover into this kind of gladiatorial ring.
Mm,
And then there's 2 doors, and behind one door is his daughter, behind the other door is a tiger, and he is told to choose which door to open. If he opens the one with the woman, he gets to marry the love of his life. If he opens the tiger, he gets mauled to death.
mhm.
And the story ends with him about to choose a door.
Ah,
Now, if he had chosen a door and you learn what happened, I would have forgotten that story immediately.
yeah, I know
It
what you
is
mean.
now 20 years
And you
later,
still
and I
remember
am
it.
still
Yeah.
thinking about that story.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
And
totally
it's
get it.
because there's so much, the question allows for it to continue to live and continue to grow and continue to sort of vibrate in the
Mm,
mind as like it's always going to bug the shit out of you that you
yes.
don't know what's behind those
Uh-huh.
doors
Uh-huh.
or what door he chooses.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I also, like I said, I come from poetry, so I am very much embedded in that practice of an incredibly concise piece of writing becoming like doing a lot of load bearing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a I've talked about this in other interviews too, and it's also a very dumb analogy, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I feel like I'm kind of onto something, which is I think of uh poetry and short stories as being like a zip file
Mm,
where you have this massive emotion or memory or story or idea or question that is then compressed down into this very compact object that is like
mm,
literally small enough to like fold up and put in a pocket.
mm,
But when read, it has to be able to expand back to its full form in the mind. It has to like a zip file, it has to
mm.
be able to uncompress when it's
Okay.
opened. Where a novel I think of as just like a fully uncompressed
Mm,
form, where it's like what's on the page, you read it, it's fairly similar in size, both
mm.
physically and internally.
Yes.
Which isn't to say that there's not obviously imaginative expansion that comes from reading novels, but I don't think it's quite as
Mm,
extreme as with short stories and poetry.
mhm,
And so I think that's the real challenge when you're writing in those modes is
mm,
it's easy to compress something. What's difficult is to compress something that then when read is able to fully maintain its complexity and expand once
mm.
again in the mind into the original size that it was.
Yeah.
And that's I think what's really exciting about working in those modes is that challenge. How do you
Mm,
take something and compress it down in a way that will then umbrella open
mm,
when read?
mm. I totally agree with you, and I think you are onto something in that kind of like theory of yours about
I just need to come up with a
yeah.
less dumb analogy than a zip
No, no, no.
file.
It's not dumb. It's
But,
really
it's
good,
working
actually.
at the moment.
And just you mentioned that you're working on a novel, so just to start to wrap things up, could you explain a bit? Is it a secret project, or could you share a little tiny bit with us?
They've never told me I'm not allowed to talk about it, so I've been talking about
Okay.
it. I have yet to receive a cease and desist from my publisher. So, yeah, I am currently insane because I'm in the last 5 weeks before my final editing deadline
Okay.
on this book that I've been working on for like 2 years now.
Wow.
Um, it is a New England Gothic set here in
Whoa.
my southern Vermont hometown, and it covers some of the emotional ground that Sundown at the Eternal Staircase covers. It's also about two kind of like punk girls who are in their like stuck in their hometown and one of them disappears.
Okay.
So it's kind of trying to grapple with those same questions
Mm,
of like a hometown that swallows people down with
mm,
with addiction or failure to launch or economic depression or what have you.
mm,
And sort of what that does to a place, what that does to a community. And it's has cursed perfume and like haunted carnivals.
Wow.
And, that tower in the woods that I mentioned
Yes.
is featured in it. It's all set actually in this specific town that I'm from.
Okay.
I changed the name of the town, but anyone who's ever been here will know. I mean, I didn't change any of the place names, so it's very obvious. And yeah, so I'm finishing up this kind of accursed hometown gothic novel.
It sounds
And
great.
the idea is we're hoping for a summer 2027 publication.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
so yeah,
okay.
it should be out in about a year.
We will
Um,
be looking for to see it and to read it and hopefully maybe also in Spanish. But anyhow,
Hopefully, yeah,
we
I
will
would
be
love to
looking
see it in
for
Spanish.
I mean, it sounds really good. It sounds great. Also, the last two things I'm going to ask you is what we ask everybody. If you would, if you could invite somebody to Librisimo, who would it be? But it has to be alive. You can't, we cannot, we're not allowed, we're not using we has, to.
Um, does it have to be translated into Spanish?
No, 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 no. It doesn't have to be
Doesn't
translated.
have to.
Anybody.
Okay, I would recommend there's an author named Christina Ten.
Okay.
Christina Kristina, and Ten spell like Ten, the number
Okay.
10. She is a short story writer whose first collection came out earlier this year.
Mm.
It is, I mean, like if you liked these stories, if you like Kelly Link, if you like, Karen Russell, Amy Bender, Angela Carter, Helen Oyeyemi, if
Yeah.
you like that wheelhouse, you're gonna love Christina
Okay.
Ten. Yeah, she's all of the stories in this collection of hers are um are based in different like childhood games, but like
Okay.
teen middle school girl games,
Oh,
like
okay.
cootie catchers and like Ouija boards and like
Okay.
putting glue on your hands and peeling it off. And she works with the same kind of logic where it's like there's a story where like when you get like Elmer's glue on your hands
Yes,
as a
yes,
kid and
yes.
you pretend it's your skin and you peel it
Yeah.
off. She has a story where a class of kids start doing that, and when they peel off, they become these shadow versions of the children.
Okay.
And like
Wow.
it's just a cool,
It's
cool
so
short story
cool.
collection. It's one of my favorite things I've read in the past year. And I think, yeah, if the viewers and listeners of this
Yeah.
like a weird girl short story, Christina 10 is kind of the new, in my opinion, queen of
Mm.
the weird girl short stories, and not enough people have
Well,
read her stuff. So yeah.
definitely we're gonna check it out. And I was gonna ask you about a book that you would recommend because we are building this virtual library with all our guests. We ask
Hmm.
everybody to recommend one book. It doesn't have to be the last book they've read or the best ever. It could be something that they've read recently that just they thought it was great because during summer when we stopped the program for a while, we released the list of the books and who recommend them, and people can choose. They have a fantastic so we're building this little library. And I'm not sure if you want to maybe say maybe Christina's book or
Yeah,
yeah.
so her book is called Tell Me Yours, I'll Tell You Mine.
Okay.
And I highly recommend it. I absolutely adored it. So I would say that's my short story rec.
Okay.
If someone's looking for a novel rec, I really, really loved The Bog Wife,
Okay.
which oh yeah. The Bog Wife by Kay Chronister.
Okay.
Kaychronister, The Bog Wife. And that one is it's like a swamp gothic,
Wow.
which
Anything
is
gothic is
yeah.
good.
Anything gothic is good. That's what they say.
Gothic is good. It's good. It's good. So and also thanks for recommending female authors because sometimes, at least in Spain, we are still struggling to recognize female voices. So I thank you for that. And I cannot recommend your book enough. So I'm gonna say it again in Spanish is. Bestias, Espacios y Fábulas de lo Extraño. 14 wonderful stories. You have to read them. Horror Vacui is the publisher, and I just wanted to thank you for coming to Librisimo, for talking to us, and I hope that we will see you again. Anyhow, this is your home anytime.
Thank you so much. It was really fun chatting with you.
Thanks.